This is Josh Friedman, and for the first time in more than 4 months, I am not coming to you from Africa, albeit this video will be discussing my travels around East Africa. As you can tell, I'm inside an airport, and maybe based on this flag right behind me, you can figure out that I am in Dubai. I'm currently in transit on my way back to Europe following nearly 4.5 months in East Africa. I arrived in Zanzibar on the 1st of December, as I discussed in my Tanzania recap video, and spent nearly 3 months in Tanzania. Then I traveled to Rwanda, Uganda, Kenya, and Ethiopia. I just departed Ethiopia hours ago, and altogether I spent 4 months and practically 2 weeks, I believe it was 4 months and 13 days in East Africa. And I would say, to start things off, there was a bit of a lack of balance, as basically already explained in the Tanzania video. I'm not going to harp on it. I spent more than a month and a half in Zanzibar, which definitely cut into the time that I spent elsewhere. And also, as I mentioned in the Tanzania recap, I spent a month in Dar Salam. So I spent more than 2.5 months of this 4+ month trip just in Zanzibar and Dar Salam. So that did not leave me with a whole heck of a lot of time to spend in the 4 countries that followed Tanzania, but I did spend more than a week in each of them. I spent, I think, 8 or 9 days each in Rwanda and Uganda, and I spent about 2 weeks each in Kenya and Ethiopia. I think I spent a little more than 2 weeks in Kenya and a little less, I think it was 13 days, in Ethiopia. So I've already discussed at length in the Tanzania recap video about Tanzania and my thoughts about the country, so I'll leave that link in the description below and just watch it if you haven't already and you want to hear my thoughts about Tanzania. I don't regret spending all that time there, although if I were doing the trip again, I wouldn't have spent so much time hanging out on the beach in Zanzibar. Not to say that Zanzibar is not lovely and not interesting, and as you might have seen from my coverage of Revolution Day, there are certainly historical and political events that have taken place there that I'm very interested in, but as my travels progressed, I found that I was becoming fascinated with the history and the politics of the region, and because of that, if I were doing it again, I would have moved on a bit faster. Anyway, moving on now to Rwanda. It just so happens that the way things are timed, it's now the 25th anniversary of the Rwandan Genocide. The anniversary was marked about a week ago with events going on during a week of remembrance, which I was not there for, but I find it noteworthy that my visit to Rwanda came just before the 25th anniversary of the genocide, and even though I did not spend that much time in the country, and I unfortunately didn't get to go to some of the different locations where massacres took place, as I had hoped to do. I did feel like that I got to see and feel quite a bit, even though I was just in Kigali for 8 or 9 days. As I was there, I was becoming quite interested in Paul Kagame, the man, the leader, the politician, and the regional figure, and it was only so fitting that as I was there, this diplomatic spat was erupting between Kagame and, you could say Museveni, but between the Rwandan government and the Ugandan government. So that provided this additional storyline. So not just was the 25th anniversary of the genocide coming up, but there was this big diplomatic spat that arguably, as I explained in 1 or 2 videos, stems from the genocide and the conflicts in the region that arose out of the genocide. And it was kind of bizarre to be crossing the border between Rwanda and Uganda, heading from Rwanda to Uganda as there was action and as that border was in the news. Granted, when I was crossing in the middle of the night, I didn't see anything, didn't see any trucks backed up. I don't see anyone or anything on the border. That border was very much in the news at the time, and it was interesting, bizarre, and possibly telling to be seeing this bit of a trade war within this trade bloc that's supposed to be basically a shining example of free trade on the African continent, that being the East African community, which I've discussed in a couple videos in recent weeks and months. Moving on to Uganda, I don't feel like things clicked quite as much in Uganda as they did in Rwanda from a travel and journalistic perspective. I don't recall if I discussed this, but I do have. I think I might have brought it up that as soon as I arrived in the country, I could get off the bus in Kampala, and I'm immediately getting harassed by people for filming. I think I was just filming myself, just talking on the camera like I'm doing right now. And that repeated itself 2 or 3 times in Kampala. Just average people seem to be very hostile to me, walking around with a camera, filming myself no less, not even filming them. And in Uganda, I ventured out into this village camp that I discussed in one of the videos. It was nice. I needed a break from the cities. I was just bouncing from city to city. In fact, at that point, kind of focusing on demographics and these projected demographic booms, which I discussed at length in Dar Salam. I talked about it a bit in Kampala. It's something I was planning on discussing in Nairobi, but I didn't get into. But I don't think in Uganda I really did such a great job of delving into the political situation there, although I did it a bit in 1 or 2 of the videos. I'd like to go back to Uganda, as I said, although I didn't. Kampala didn't seem too compelling to me as a destination for a traveler. Obviously, there's far more to the country than just Kampala. I haven't been to Entebbe, I haven't been to Lake Victoria there, albeit I have been to Lake Victoria in Tanzania. Lake Victoria indeed is very nice. I did take a trip to the equator in Uganda, which was pretty cool. It was my first time playing hopscotch on the equator, which I posted about on Instagram, but I don't think I discussed on this channel. I enjoyed that, but still the Uganda portion of the trip was definitely not the most memorable. But it was important, and it fit right in with this, getting into the storyline of the spat between Rwanda and Uganda and what the heck is this East African community. And I'm glad that I started learning a bit about that, because eventually in Ethiopia I would get to the African Union headquarters, and I think, which I failed to mention in my, jumping ahead a little bit, what I failed to mention in my African Union video in Addis Ababa is that, hold on one second. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. Oh, sorry about that. Okay. Just a minor interruption. Kind of like what happened in the African Union video, albeit with, this is just a polite security guy, or I don't know what his job is. Not someone with a big gun telling me to stop filming. Anyway, I think it's important to note that as Africa attempts to create a single market, a continental free trade zone, that the area that's supposed to be the shining star of that, the East African community in itself, is having a bit of a trade war. So it was very good timing to go to Rwanda and Uganda as that was happening, start gaining some understanding and background of the successes and failures of free trade initiatives on the continent. Moving on to Kenya. Kenya was, a lot happened in Kenya. Kenya was action-packed. Speaking of which, I did kind of bump into the Ugandan president, Yoweri Museveni, in Kenya. He was on my train, the SGR ride from Mombasa to Nairobi, as was Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta. That was a very nice coincidence, and I think at some point I'm going to edit and compile the video footage I have from that train ride and create a single video about that, or just putting it all together. It was I guess the trip was really starting to blend together at that point. Rwanda was leading to Uganda, Uganda was leading to Kenya. And yeah, I did most of my reporting in Mombasa, not in Nairobi, which was not what I envisioned at first, but it really made so much sense because everything having to do with China and geopolitics was kind of coming into play in Mombasa. I was there at the port, and Museveni is getting a tour of the port, and he's driving by my hotel room, his caravan, maybe Kenyatta's caravan as well. And there's the talk of, was the port put up as collateral in order to secure the financing for the SGR? And it really felt like Kenya was the place where my whole trip was coming together. I'd spent all this time in Tanzania, and I developed this affinity for Dar Salam and Tanzania in general, not just Zanzibar, as I explained. Not like every other tourist, I wasn't flocking to the safaris, I didn't climb the mountain, although I'd like to, and unlike most tourists, I actually liked Dar Salam. But when I made it to Kenya, it just seemed like the geopolitics of Kenya they just seemed more significant than the geopolitics of Tanzania, and things clicked with the timing. The two presidents happened to be on my train ride, and I think I realized that I was previously overstating the significance of the port of Dar Salam, albeit who knows what the future has in store. That could end up being the main port in the region, but Mombasa is certainly a competitor, if not already being a much more significant port. I think I've noted as well, Kenya's planning on building another port. And jumping ahead, Ethiopia was a bit frustrating, and part of that is because I want to do so much more. I want to ride the Ethiopian version of the SGR, another Chinese built and financed railway, which takes you to Djibouti, and Djibouti's Red Sea port. So there's like significant port in Dar es Salaam, significant port in Mombasa, significant port in Djibouti. These are all connected. Some of them have a whole lot of Chinese connections and whatnot. And in Ethiopia, it was getting to the end of the trip, and I admit there were a lot of frustrations. I had all kinds of work to do outside of going around and producing videos. And what I haven't really discussed is that Ethiopia takes a lot of patience. Even though it's the capital of Africa, it really lags behind other countries in the region in the sense that there are such frequent blackouts. The power is going out. It just seems like the power goes out 5 times a day. Although sometimes the power goes out in short stints. Sometimes the power goes out for hours. There's some Wi-Fi outages as well. Ethiopia takes patience, and it's a big country, and cities and landmarks are very spread out, and there's a lot I want to see, and it takes a lot of time, and I didn't make it out of Addis Ababa, so there were definite frustrations during my stay, which just concluded in Ethiopia. But at the same time, I was really starting to gain an appreciation for the country, its unique culture, its cuisine, which I found out I could actually eat a lot of the food. That was kind of surprising. I just assumed that I wasn't going to be able to eat much of it, but I did. And so I think I'm going to be heading back to Ethiopia sometime in the near future. I also had some potential work arising there. We'll see what happens. But I'm very drawn to Ethiopia, and I really want to come back to at least a few of the countries, if not all of them. So I think I'll be coming back to the region. I don't know when, possibly sooner rather than later. There's so much more I've left to see. I found that Ethiopia probably being the exception, but the amount of English spoken in East Africa makes things fairly manageable. And now I've got a better sense of how to go about things from a travel perspective. So I think if I come back to the region, it's probably things in terms of work and travel are probably going to go a lot smoother. And I love being on the coast, and there's several places I want to go back to and a bunch of places that I haven't hit that I want to see. So it's been very enjoyable. It's combined work and travel and pleasure and relaxation, spending time on a beautiful island, going to the coast again, Indian Ocean coast in Mombasa and Dar Salam, and seeing this very unique culture that is in Ethiopia, really getting into the swing of things in terms of covering geopolitics in Kenya, getting to learn a little bit about the genocide in Rwanda right before the 25th anniversary. So altogether, it was really an incredible trip, very impactful trip, possibly the most memorable trip of my life, and I'm very grateful for that. And I've circled around the Dubai airport, Terminal 3, enough time now, and I want to just ever so slightly get into town before I gotta rush back to board my flight back to Europe. So I'm gonna wrap this up. I hope you enjoyed following along my adventures. If you'd like to go back and watch the videos, they're all part of an East Africa playlist on the YouTube channel. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for joining me, and for now, goodbye for Dubai, and see you back in Europe.